All right, all right, all right. Welcome, everybody. Another edition of Legend Sports and Amplify, where we're telling stories about baseball history, Negro League history, card art, collecting, research, you name it. And I am really, really happy today to have on author, researcher, young Negro League historian Cam Perron. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think yours is definitely a story I hope people learn about and appreciate, and I hope it's kind of what I've been trying to do every day. What your story has been, the learning about the history of the Negro Leaguers, and you were able to do it, firsthand, which to me is just something that is really really cool. It's intriguing, and I'd love to hear some of these stories. So tell us. I mean, I told you briefly before we got on here. Dr. Brunson gave me that origin story. I love to hear how people got interested in what they are now involved in, and you have got a story I think that's really really cool. Tell us about it, man.
Yeah, so I grew up in Arlington, Massachusetts, two towns over from Boston. As a young kid, I played every sport you could play: baseball, soccer, football, lacrosse, hockey. By the end of elementary school, baseball and hockey were really the only ones that stuck. Growing up, in addition to playing all these sports, I was collecting everything. I collected comic books, stamps, Nirvana memorabilia, all sorts of things. Always kind of picked up sports cards here and there. But every 6 months, it was a new collection. I would go to local coin shops, local comic book shops. I sold my first thing on eBay, I believe in first or second grade. Um, so really just a collector by heart, and sports fan. And by the end of fifth grade, it was 2004. The Red Sox won their first World Series in quite some time. And as a young baseball fan, I had watched the Red Sox make it to the playoffs. I had watched the whole season and followed the World Series, and just to see them win was, unbelievable. As this young kid, they hadn't done it in years, and I had followed the whole thing. So after the Red Sox won the World Series, many of the players on the team started doing a bunch of little kind of meet and greets around Massachusetts, and I went to a couple of them. I waited outside for about 4 or 5 hours in the snow to meet Johnny Damon at a book signing, and a couple hours into the signing, he said, actually an employee at the bookstore said he's got to go. There's too many people. We started chanting, you know, Johnny don't go, Johnny don't go. We got the whole store to chant, and he ended up staying all night, and signing and meeting everybody. And over the next coming months following the win, I met a couple other ball players from that 2014, David Ortiz. Again, had to wait 4 or 5 hours in line for him to meet him. But during that period, 2004 going into 2005, meeting some of these athletes on the Red Sox, I also began kind of this little collection of Red Sox related memorabilia pertaining to the 2004 World Series. I began going to a couple of little memorabilia shows and sports card stores in the area, collecting cards and really just anything that I liked at the time. So I did that on and off for the next couple of years. And in 2007, I was over a friend's house after school, and he showed me a couple signed cards that he had. And he and his father had been writing to former baseball players through the mail. You would write out a letter explaining who you are, send a self-addressed stamped envelope, a couple baseball cards, and send it off to the player. And you could go on this website called sportscollectors.net. You could see the addresses of many of these former athletes, if they would reply or not.
Cool.
None of the current players would ever reply. you could go and look at, Alex Rodriguez's success rate in terms of through the mail requests, and hundreds of people had sent to him. Nobody got a reply. But then you could go and look at Virgil Trucks, who was a pitcher in the 40s and 50s, and 300 people had sent to him, and 300 people got it back. And
Nice.
I instantly said, okay, well, screw the modern players. I've already waited outside, hours and hours to meet Johnny Damon, David Ortiz, and it was cool and all, but it didn't really, you didn't really get that time with them. I remember when I had met David Ortiz, we waited for 4 hours at this arcade, and we finally get up there, and they had told us that we would be able to get our baseball card or baseball signed. I had brought a couple cards with me. That, they got rid of that. So now we would only get a pre-signed photo. And then by the time we get up to him, we are told that if we want a picture with him, we have to do a group photo with about 20 other people that were next to us in line. So we're like, are you kidding me? We wait 4 hours. You changed the rules like 3 times, and then we can't even get a photo with him. You have to shove us in with 20 other people. So I started to kind of realize that these modern players, while some of them were nice, they were celebrities. They were current superstars. They were making big salaries. That's not really, what I wanted to focus on. So I began writing letters to these old Major League Baseball players, guys mostly who played pre-1970. I would go to local card shops, and I began going to a local memorabilia show a couple towns over, and I would make a list in advance of all the cards I needed to pull to write out letters, and I'd start writing them off. And within a couple months, I had gone nuts. I was sending out 40, 50 envelopes a week. Guys like Bobby Doerr, Sparky Anderson, George Kell, Al Kaline.
Awesome.
Many of the stars from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they would all reply within a couple weeks usually.
That's
and
awesome.
Then I started to realize, well, hey, I can look at Bobby Doerr's success rate, and 1,000 people have written to this guy, and everybody gets it back. This, it's cool, but it's really like they're just going through the motions. You send them the cards, they sign them, send them back. That's that. There wasn't really much fun in that. You were collecting stuff, but everybody was doing it. So I started writing to some of these more obscure baseball players. That's where guys like Virgil Trucks come in. He, not super obscure, but not a household name. So I would pull out, I would get a couple 58, 59, 1960 Topps cards, send them to Virgil Trucks, and he would write back a 2 or 3 page long letter.
Wow.
Asking me what position I played, telling me about some of his, times in baseball. And that really, kind of did it for me. That's cool. Now I'm engaging with these guys. I'm getting more out of it than just a couple cards that everybody around the country is getting. I'm getting, an experience, a piece of history. And that's what really, that's what drew me to collecting in the first place, was that kind of, that history. So I began writing to a lot of these guys who played 1 or 2 games, in 1956, a guy that had 1 baseball card, and that was that. And I did that for a couple months, and I enjoyed that much more. And then, so now we're probably looking at about 6 to 9 months in of this through the mail autograph collecting. Topps came out with a baseball card set called Allen and Ginter, which is a kind of remake of an old tobacco card set in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And in the set, they would have a couple, about 12 to 15 non-sports people. And they also had 5 or 6 Negro League players in this set. So me and a couple other guys on this sportscollectors.net forum said, hey, let's write letters to these Negro League players. And we found their addresses and wrote them letters and got replies within a couple weeks. And just like the Virgil Trucks kind of situation, many of the, the couple Negro League players that I wrote back these lengthy handwritten letters talking all about, their time in the Negro League. And I was like, wow, these guys,
They want to tell their story.
yeah,
Yeah.
very few people had reached out to these players. They were
Hmm.
stars, and here I am, just this young 12-year-old kid writing to them, and they write me back this 2 or 3 page long letter, and it was apparent to them, to me, that very few people had written to them,
Hmm.
and I was hooked, and I had already been kind of going down the rabbit hole of the kind of underdoggy kind of players,
Hmm.
the less recognized athletes. And once I had corresponded with a couple of the Negro League players, I realized that this is cool.
Hmm.
Not only were there many former players out there that were still alive, but some of these guys had lengthy careers and have quite the history, but there's nothing out there.
Hmm.
Many players, they didn't even have photos of themselves playing.
Amazing.
So my mission was born. My passion project had kind of
Awesome.
started.
It's beautiful, man. I love it. A couple of things I hope people take out of that. You were 12 years old when you started doing this. I mean, that to me is, that's next level, man. At 12 years old to be already down that path and understanding and getting some of the insights you got, I think is great, which I'm sure has helped you. We're talking, this is what year? 2004, 5 time frame?
2007.
Seven now. So we're talking now 15 years ago, right? So I'm sure a lot of what you've learned, you've refined over the last 15 years or so since then, and it's really, I'm sure, been an incredible journey that you've been on here. And one of the things I've been trying to point out to people on here, just like you found out, these guys are out there. The at some point in your town, in your area, there was a player, a barnstorming tour, a team, something associated with the Negro Leagues came through your area. I mean, I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and it's just north of Philadelphia, about an hour or so. And when, in the 70s, in the 1970s, when I was about that age, the Clowns came through. I don't know if they were the Indianapolis Clowns, but the Clowns came through.
Likely. Yeah.
They were still barnstorming in the 1970s, and they were in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So, these stories are out there, and I think it's great that you've been able to shine some light on this. I mean, there have been, like Phil Dixon has a wonderful collection of interviews that he has recorded over the decades with many of these guys that have passed on. I told him when I had him on here a couple of months ago, that's like a national treasure. So I'm sure a lot of these things that you have, they're a piece of history that is really something to be proud of. I'll tell you. So this picture here blows me away. I'm going to put it up. This was, what year did this happen? This one with the bus, and you're with a number of Negro League players. Where was that? What year was that? And how many guys were there?
Um, I think we're on a little bit of a lag here.
Yeah, probably a few second delay on. It should come up on the Twitch. It's that picture that's on your website that
Oh,
says
that was
Lost
about.
State.
I want to say that was about 2017 at our reunion. Um,
Wow. How many of
and
those
we'll, we'll, we'll get we'll get to that. We've had now. It started in 2010. I'll
Okay.
get to that whole thing soon.
All right.
Um,
So,
on a side note, the Indianapolis Clowns, they played until 1989, but the Clowns in the 70s, if you watch the movie Bingo Long's
mhm,
Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings with
mhm,
Richard Pryor,
mhm,
Billy D. Williams, and James Earl Jones,
mhm.
towards the end of the movie, a lot of the guys who were actually on the Clowns in the 70s are kind of there as background kind of guys.
Really, very
Yeah.
cool. That movie just had its 40th anniversary, I think, the other day. I think it was 40th or 45th anniversary. It was from the 1970-ish, 76 maybe. I'm not sure, but and that movie has its pros and cons. I mean, it tells a great story. There are many people who think that maybe it doesn't quite portray it the way kind of shines too much of lightheartedness on it, and it was more than that. I mean, you know, none of us today, I don't think, can ever really appreciate 100 years ago what many of these guys, and even 50 years ago, that some of these players were talking about in the 60s and 70s, had to deal with when it came to you know, the racial tension at the time, Jim Crow laws, traveling in the South, having to have the Green Book to be able to travel around. I mean, all of these things. I mean, I can't even imagine some of the stories that you have heard. So how many interviews, how many players have you been able to, were you able to get in touch with over the years?
I've never counted, but, you know, 500 plus.
No
More.
kidding.
And it all starts, you know, age 12. So
500?
At least.
Wow. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible.
I mean, during my early days, there was probably 50, 60 guys a week I would talk to.
And you not just letters, you were talking to these guys on the phone and
yeah. So you want me to take it back and
absolutely. Yeah.
So after the Topps, Allen, and Ginter set, I got a couple replies from a couple of these ball players that played in the Negro League and now had, you know, their first baseball card in 2007. I began going on the sportscollectors.net forum and also this Negro League Baseball Players Association forum online. Mm-hmm. And I started kind of speaking with a couple other collectors and a researcher by the name of Wayne Stivers, who's a well-known kind of Negro League researcher. And I started just getting a couple other addresses of former players from these guys, especially from Wayne. And I wrote out another probably 20, 30, 40 letters to former players. And, you know, these were guys who didn't have baseball cards. And they started replying to me as well. And a couple of them, you know, threw their phone number in there. I wrote my phone number in there. I'm not quite sure. And every time I wrote to a player, I'd ask them if they had stayed in touch with a former teammate, you know, mm-hmm. know anybody else, if they had any photos. And many of them had no photos, no newspaper articles. They just kind of assumed they were the last one left on their team. Wow. And during those interactions where I was writing to those guys, a couple of them, you know, started kind of calling me up on the phone, or I called them. I also began engaging with a couple guys over email who I had met over this Negro League message board, and we began corresponding. So now it's like kind of end of 2007, and I'm kind of communicating with a couple of these former baseball players on the phone and over email. I'm 12 going on 13. So one of the first guys that I really started speaking with was this guy, Reginald Howard, who played with the Indianapolis Clowns in 1956. And he asked me for some help on his website or something. You know, he was old, I was young, maybe I could assist. And in speaking with him, you know, I realized that, or he brought it to my attention that one of his former teammates, Gilbert Black, you know, he hadn't spoken with him in many years. And then about a week or so later, I was talking with this guy, Al Barks, who I had also met over this Negro League message board. He also played in 1956 with the New York Black Yankees, which was kind of like the opposing team that would travel with the Indianapolis Clowns. And in talking with him, I realized, well, hey, wait, like, Al, you played with Reggie Howard, you know, on the same team. And then I got them in touch, and, you know, they hadn't communicated since 1956. And that's, you know, in wow. that I realized, look, there's guys out there who haven't stayed in touch with their former teammates, and these guys are here. They just need to be kind of brought together. And then I also realized that, you know, there might be a lot more guys out there than, you know, we think are actually alive. If you look at a 1956, you know, Red Sox roster at that time, in 2007, there was a decent amount of guys on the team still alive. So why would there only be one or two guys from the 1956 Kansas City Monarchs or Indianapolis Clowns that are known to be alive? The ratio should be kind of similar. So I got Al and Reggie in touch, and in speaking with those guys, I realized there were a couple of other ball players that, you know, they hadn't stayed in touch with. One of Reggie's good friends on the 56 Clowns was Gilbert Black. And over the coming months, I had heard from a couple other ball players. Oh yeah, Gilbert Black. I know him. I haven't heard from him. Maybe he's in New York or Connecticut. That's where he was from. So flash forward to the end of 2007. I'm on this Negro League message board again. I'd become a little bit of a private detective towards the end of 2007. I began calling all sorts of phone numbers and trying to track down a couple of these ball players myself using information that players had given me. So Gilbert Black, for example, probably born in 1935, 1936, would have been 20 in 1956, living somewhere in New York or Connecticut. I called a bunch of phone numbers that I found on whitepages.com and several other finder websites. I couldn't find him. One guy told me that he had passed away. And then end of 2007, I'm on this message board, and this woman says, hey, my father played in the Negro League. I message her, it's Gilbert Black's daughter. And now I'm in touch with Gilbert Black. I get him in touch with Reggie Howard, and a couple of these guys who hadn't communicated in 50 plus years are now in touch. And at that point, I realized there's guys out here that they just need to be found. It turns out Gil's daughter posted that because they were gathered during the holidays, just kind of talking about, old times. And she said, hey, let me Google this and see if I can find out any more information. And that's why she made the post. So end of 2007, I had kind of run out of guys to write letters to. And my whole purpose is find guys that are out there that people don't know are out there. Mm-hmm. So I started going through these old newspaper articles. I would find them on various newspaper archive websites. I would look at old rosters. I would talk with the couple players that I knew. And sometimes they would get me in touch with other players. And I would just quiz the hell out of them. Who was your first baseman? Who was your second baseman? Who was your third baseman? Where was he from? How old was he? When was the last time you saw him? And sometimes these guys would give me different leads. And then I would look at a newspaper article. Okay, Van Rushing, age 19, from Chicago. I'd go on White Pages. Is there anybody whose age matches up named Van Rushing in Chicago? Oh, no, but there's one in Arizona. I'd call him. Boom, it's him. Wow. And now I found Van Rushing. And then I would say, hey, Van, will I know one of your former teammates? And then they'd be in touch. So I became this kind of crazy private detective autograph collector towards the end of 2007.
So tell me, what did Van Rushing say when he answers the phone and it's you? What was that like?
So I'm this young kid, and the way my mom tells it, I'm making my voice sound deeper, just to kind of sound like an adult when I'm calling these people. But I would just say, hey, I'm a 12, 13-year-old baseball player and fan of the Negro League. I've been researching the Negro League for a year now or 6 months now. I was just wondering if you're the guy, that played with the Indianapolis Clowns in 1959. And he'd say, yeah, and we'd start talking. And in most cases, we'd talk on the phone for hours.
I bet.
And my entire middle school existence of 7th and 8th grade was just me getting all my homework done in school to kind of come home and try to find new players to speak with.
That is awesome.
And then when I would find one guy, I'd get him in touch with one of his teammates who I happened to know. And I started kind of just putting a lot of these guys back together. And it really started to add up. I mean, by the end of middle school, there was probably 75, 80 guys who I had tracked down, and they hadn't been interviewed before, even by some of these researchers who had written, many books on the Negro League. And that's when I got in touch with Dr. Leitner Avell. So I had now found, a bunch of these players. And I kept hearing about this guy, Dr. Avell, Dr. Avell this, Dr. Avell that. He's in all these articles about the Negro League that had been written in recent years. So I emailed him a couple times, never heard back. Finally, I get him on the phone a couple months later, and I kind of tell him, hey, I'm Cam. I'm 13 years old. Been doing this research. I've tracked down, a couple dozen of these players who I'm pretty sure you have not spoken with before or documented their history.
Wow.
And he was like, oh, yeah, I know those guys. Like, I didn't know they were alive. And the way he tells it, he thought I was doing a school project. But at that point, there was never any school project. We became close friends and began talking on the phone daily. And he would send me on leads to try to track down guys. And I would fill him in on some of the players that I had tracked down.
This could have been a doctorate thesis. What you're working on here, it could have been a school project.
Yeah, I mean, not middle school.
Not middle school.
But Dr. Avell was, he's old school. He's, about 70 years old now, and I'm this kid growing up on the internet. Mm-hmm. He comes from a time where, when he wanted to go find former Negro League baseball players, he would just fly to a city knowing one guy, and they would just drive around town kind of putting feelers out and try to wrangle up as many players as they could. And then he'd throw kind of a little barbecue and get them to sign stuff and interview them. Or he would just call 411 and go through every, Willie Wells in the country until he could find Willie Wells. Whereas I can just go and say, okay, somebody was born on, August 14th, 1938. I can go on White Pages or another People Finder website, reference that birthday and the name, and find out, where they're living now and find them within a matter of minutes. Mm-hmm. So we kind of contrasted in that sense, but made kind of a great team. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Avell and I get close. He realizes that I have, been tracking down all these players, and he gets me in touch with a bunch of players that he had been communicating with as well. And that kind of goes on throughout the next coming years. So now, I guess early high school, I'm on the phone with players all the time. Daily, 5-6 hours a day. I start making baseball cards on my computer,
cool.
Printing them out, sending them to the players, and they can give them out to their friends and family and sign them and make a couple bucks. One of my former players that I had been speaking with, Bob Mitchell, tells me about this pension program that he had been working on. Former players, if you played 4 years, Major League Baseball will give you a pension of $10,000 a year plus back pay. And I start tracking down all these newspaper articles, and I'm sending them to these players, and they had never seen these things.
Probably not.
Because if you had a game in North Carolina on a Sunday, by Monday you were in Virginia, you never saw the paper. You could have thrown a no-hitter the night before and had a big picture in the paper, and you never saw it. Mm-hmm. So I was sending that stuff out. So I really just got completely immersed in trying to document this history, call these players, track them down. In many cases, when I'm trying to track down a player, I was really just relying off of, a name and an age in a newspaper article or something that a player had mentioned. Mm-hmm. And then I would just call dozens and dozens of numbers on my home phone. And many times you get a wrong number. Someone would, it'd be disconnected. Someone would say, they just moved, and you'd crack them. And that just became my life. Boy. Over the next couple of years, Dr. Avell and I became really close. And by end of 2009, I want to say I'm entering my sophomore year in high school, Dr. Avell and I start talking, and I had become very close with many of these former players who I had now had relationships with going back, 2 or 3 years in some cases. And Dr. Avell knew hundreds of players in his years of research. He said, hey, maybe we can do a reunion of some kind. Mm-hmm. Every year we do this little kind of banquet in Birmingham, Alabama. A dozen or two of the local former living players in Birmingham come together for this one-day banquet. Cool. Maybe we can do kind of like a reunion, like a family reunion. And we kind of toyed around the idea, Dr. Avell, myself, and Chef Clayton Sherrard, who's a former bat boy of the Black Barons and a friend of Dr. Avell's. And they made it happen. So my job was, call as many former players as possible, try to invite these guys. And Dr. Avell and Chef Clayton would kind of work out the details, get a bunch of hotel rooms, and line up a couple days of activities. So going into early 2010, we went ahead with this reunion. I'm this 14-year-old kid, 13, 14-year-old kid calling all these players up saying, hey, come to Birmingham, come to Birmingham. No invite in hand, nothing. And they're lining up all these details. And we end up getting like 50, 60 guys who say they'll go. And at this point, it's just their word for it. Mm-hmm. Some guys I had found 5 days prior and invited. Some guys had told me 6 months before that they would go. And I end up taking a week off of school. I go down there with my mom, and everybody who said they were going to come came, and more.
Awesome.
One guy, even I had got a call that this man by the name of Roosevelt Jackson was still alive. He was 91 or something, lived in Georgia. Another researcher had told me about him. I called him up. I was in Charlotte on the way to Birmingham. I was on my connection. I said, Roosevelt, my name is Cam. I'm heading to this Negro League reunion. He said, when is it? I said, it starts, today, tonight. He said, okay, I'll be there. I'll get on the next bus. I saw him at midnight that night. He got on the Greyhound bus and age 91 or 92 and blind.
Oh,
and he made it on the Greyhound, and he was there. He wasn't going to miss it.
Amazing. I can't. I mean, I can't even imagine at your age doing that. I have a son who just joined the Navy, another one who's heading off to college in another couple of days. I've also got a 5-year-old, but anyway, they get into some things, but I'll tell you what, the persistence and the dedication that you have. What did your parents and friends think about all this when you were in the middle of doing this?
I don't think my mom ever really realized the depth of my interest in just the autographs and communicating with these players until we were going to go to the reunion. Mm-hmm. And she tells me this story about how I need to take a week off of school to go to the reunion. And for some reason, my family thought school was so important and I couldn't miss it. And to me, what am I going to learn in school about
Absolutely.
Christopher Columbus or, some random thing about science during that 1 week that is going to be more important than, going and seeing this, history, in front of me.
It was living history. That's right. Yeah. And it was making a difference in these guys' lives too. Absolutely.
And she steals one of my binders and she takes it to the guidance counselor and she shows the guidance counselor, like, look at all these handwritten letters from, this man named Bill Bethea talking all about his time, in the Negro League and playing baseball. Amazing. And what he went through. Look at what, he's communicating with Cam. And she said, go, let him, take the week off. And I think that's when it really hit her. And she had also, my parents, would sometimes get calls from these ball players because they would call during the day and I'd be in school and they'd say, hey, Cam's in school. He's not home. And they're like, what? She's like, well, he's 13 or 14. Like, and it didn't realize, it didn't click in their head that I was actually, a kid. They thought I was young. They didn't realize.
That young.
Yeah.
I think I love it. I think it's absolutely an incredible story. Did you, in talking to these guys, because many of them, like as you pointed out, were playing after the Jackie Robinson, the integration of 1947. And, as everyone who follows that or even knows a little bit about it, after that, as the gates were opened, finally, by Major League Baseball, the better players, so to speak, tended to be scooped up by Major League teams. And so now the Negro Leagues at this point were kind of starting their slow, spiral. But these guys still were playing, as you've already pointed out. Some of these teams made it into the 60s, 70s, some into the 80s. What did they feel about that? Did you guys talk about that at all? as far as the change now after 1947?
Yeah, after, Jackie came through and, the major leagues started kind of poaching the top talent from the Negro League, the league started to kind of fizzle, less teams, the quality of baseball, I think undeniably, started to, deteriorate a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the last major league team did not integrate until 1959.
Right.
Many of these teams had, quotas where they could only have one or two black guys on the team.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, tons of talented black ball players who still really had no shot. So they would, as a young, 17, 18-year-old baseball player trying to make it, you go into the Negro League.
Mm-hmm.
And even though at that time, it goes from, 8 teams to 6 teams to 4 teams or whatever, the league ends up lasting until, 1963 because there's still all these talented baseball players, and the majors is not allowing, these guys in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, some of these players realized the quality of baseball was, kind of going down in the league. But a lot of these guys also, it was the majors to them, and it was because there was nowhere else to go. Mm-hmm. That was where they were going to play, and that's where they were going to shine.
Mm-hmm. Let's back up just one second, because I know who Dr. Avell is, but we talked about this. I think that we need to shine a little bit more light on the Negro Southern League Museum. Can you talk a little bit about that, what Dr. Avell, what you've been involved in with that?
Yeah, so Dr. Avell and I, he's essentially like me, but 70, researching the Negro League for many decades, has collected signatures and artifacts, wrote numerous kind of publications on the Negro League. In 2000, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, the city of Birmingham, Alabama, agreed that they were going to finally approve the opening of a Negro League Museum. This had been something,
Mm-hmm.
in the works for 10, 15 years, had never happened. Finally, it got approval. A couple of years ago, they finally opened the museum, the Negro Southern League Museum. It's right in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, right in the outfield, right behind Regents Field, which is where the minor league Birmingham Barons play. And the museum is filled with Dr. Avell's personal collection, which is on permanent loan to the museum. There are hundreds or thousands of, signed baseballs, original artifacts, original jerseys, contracts, programs. And it really just tells the story of the Negro Southern League, which is, consists of the Birmingham Black Barons and some of the other Negro League teams in the South, but also really just tells the story about black baseball in the South and the Negro League as a whole. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing museum that I never thought would, come into existence. And here I am, this young guy who kind of just took on this interest in the Negro League, and now a museum is being built.
Very cool. For people who aren't familiar with that, it came about around the same time as the 1920 Negro National League, but it was more considered a minor league, right? When it came to like sort of an affiliation with the Negro National League.
Yeah.
But then over the years, it became one of the 7 leagues for several seasons that Major League Baseball is now, quote unquote, recognizing as major. And many of the teams that are in that came and went from the Negro National League, the Negro American League, into the Negro Southern League. The Birmingham Black Barons, were Negro League World Series, always a strong team, certainly into the late 40s. They played in the last Negro League World Series, right, in 1948. So there's a lot of history in the Negro Southern League, and I hope people check it out because, and doesn't Dr. Avell, he has something going in Dallas as well, doesn't he, or does he just have an office there?
Yeah, just an office.
Okay, because I know I've called him, I'm in Texas, I'm in Houston, just a couple hours away from there, and I know I've called him and spoken with him a few times with a couple of questions I had and some other little projects that were going on, and I think it's great. I'm glad. No, Regents Field, is that used to be old Rick? Is that Rickwood Field? Is that what that used to be as well?
No. Rickwood Field is the oldest baseball stadium in America. That's not in downtown Birmingham. It's out of it. But that's where the Birmingham Barons and the Birmingham Black Barons used to play. that's where I believe Michael Jordan, when he was with the Birmingham
Yes.
Barons, spent some time. And they still do some games there. And during our reunion, they usually have the Rickwood Classic, which is kind of an old school, early 1900s themed game, and where they'll sell programs for 5 cents, and everybody dresses in old uniforms and stuff. And it's a fun little kind of throwback day.
Awesome. So you have, like I said, to me, I considering what you've got here, this is a lot of it is like a national treasure. I mean, some of these interviews and things that you have with the players who played are something that I think. What are you going to do with it all now? Now I know you just recently published a book, right? But what are you going to do with all of these interviews and things that you've collected over the last 14, 15 years now?
I think now that we have a museum in Birmingham, I think museums are kind of ever changing. So in the future, Dr. Avell and I, have talked about, what comes next in the museum. What do we want to cycle in?
Mm-hmm.
I think, a lot of this stuff can maybe kind of, be seen in the museum in the future. But I don't know. There's still many former Negro League baseball players alive. Many of the guys that played in the late 50s and early 60s are still around. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the book. It just came out, right? This past, just a few months ago?
Yeah, it came out, I want to say, end of March, and it really just tells kind of my story, getting involved in researching the Negro League, and it intertwines it with, the stories of a handful of former players who I've become very close with over the years, because their stories are much more important than mine, and these former ball players' stories are what got me so interested in researching the Negro League in the first place. Hearing from these guys firsthand,
That's right.
for hours, just hearing them tell me these accounts of their playing days. That is what got me into all this. Mm-hmm. So kind of putting the two of those together, I thought was cool.
I'm feeling it, man. 30 years ago, I felt the same exact thing. I don't think many of those players, I don't think you ever had the opportunity to meet. They passed on before Double Duty was 103 when he passed away in 2005, which is incredible to me. Buck O'Neil passed away in 2006. Several of the others around that same period, but right after that is when you got into this. How many of those guys? Henry Aaron wrote the foreword to your book, right?
Yes, that is correct.
How did that come about? I mean, did you how did you coordinate that? What did he think of all this? Did you ever get to interview him?
No, I did not, unfortunately. That was Hank Aaron writing the foreword was set up by Nick, who was the kind of co-writer that helped me put all this together. He's from Atlanta and knew a couple higher up front office guys with the Braves who knew Hank. But that was unbelievable, and I never got the chance to meet him. I was at an event in Atlanta, and a Negro League event, and he was there, and I just I missed him by a little bit, but it was truly an honor to have
mm-hmm.
one of my favorite players of all time, and arguably one of the greatest baseball players of all time.
That's right.
Acknowledge my work and my story and be part of the book.
It's awesome. It's awesome. So these guys, you've got several hundred, as you haven't counted them, but it's got to be, you're thinking 500, 600, 700, maybe more. Most of those guys were from post Jackie Robinson. How many were you able to get that were pre-integration?
It varies. When I first started, there were a lot more. In 2007, there were a lot more guys who had played in the late 30s and early 40s that were still alive. And now, almost 15 years later, all those guys in the 30s and 40s are mostly gone. There's really only 6 or 7 guys pre-1948 that are still alive. And the majority of the players now are guys that played in the late 50s and early 60s. If you were 17 years old in 1956, now you're mid 80s. But the days of a guy that played in 1944 you're just, most of those guys lived to their late 80s, early 90s, and are now just no longer with us. And, in 15, 20 years, there might not be any players with us anymore. But
hmm I'll tell you what. I mean, you were on twice on Real Sports, right, with Brian Gumbel? How
yes.
did he? I mean, how did that happen? How did he hear your story? What was that?
So flashing backwards a bit back to high school, you had asked a question about my friends earlier. I
Uh-huh.
didn't really have that many friends. I just this working and talking with former Negro League players, it was timely. It got to the point where I would call somebody and find out that they had passed away 2 days later. And in
Wow.
that case, I said, shit, I should have called them 2 days ago. Um,
Wow.
so it was my sole focus, and with that, by my junior year in high school, I stopped playing sports. I had a couple friends that I would hang out with on occasion, but mm, really just hanging out on a Friday night and sitting around and not really doing anything.
Uh-huh.
That wasn't going to happen. This was more important to me than to just sit around and kind of waste time. And so this took on my sole focus, and some of my teachers started to find out after the first reunion in 2010. I came back to school, and people were a little bit curious, and then I think the school newspaper did a little piece, and then the town paper, and then the Boston Globe, all within like a year or so. And then the Red Sox had me on this little Red Sox report
Nate.
pregame show. And just over the next couple of years, the kind of little press started to pick up. And by my senior year in high school, me and Gilbert Black, that former player who I had been trying to find for so long, me and him started speaking at different organizations and schools around the New England area. So just a little bit of press started to get out there, and I think Real Sports kind of saw that at
Amazing.
some point.
I'll tell you what. I wish more young people like yourself at the age that you were at had gotten into more things like this. Like you said, I mean, I know I was a kid myself. I mean, everybody was. I mean, yeah, you're right. Most of the time, you're really kind of sitting around doing nothing. And what what you've done here, to me, like I said, it's a national treasure. It's a work of art. You have put together something, and at the age you did it, it's impressive, man. I know you probably heard that 1,000 times, but I think it's great. I hope. I wish more people, certainly young people, and that's one of the reasons I've been trying to put this out on different forums. Why I stream on Twitch, because it is a gaming forum. It is for more or less a younger audience. Although there's some nonsense on there recently, but the to get more people involved in these types of things, because there's so many more stories to be told. You've said it a couple of times that there's still more of this out there. I wish people would take the time to do it. You find it in your own backyard. I'm not sure if you know who Richard Perzer is, but he's another writer, saber author, lives in New Jersey. And one day he was just walking down the street, and there was a photo in a store of a bunch of baseball players. One of them was Dizzy Dean, but there were black players in the picture. It turns out in 1935 there was a barnstorming tour that came through Metuchen, New Jersey, and it was a big deal, but it gets lost to you know, the dustbin of history, because it's not like today where everything is instantaneous and you know what happens the second it happens. Many of these things, and you've said it, these guys didn't have photos even, baseball cards, not like these players have today. And I think it's something that you dedicated a lot of your time and effort to this, and I wish you the best going forward with all this, because I think it's great. What your book is on your website, right? I mean,
It's available pretty much everywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. And
now
I
these,
think,
just so
yeah.
people know, these are a lot of the words of the players themselves, right, in this book?
Yes, yes. And I think just one kind of additional theme I want to touch on that really kind of pushed me over the years is when these baseball players were playing, these are young men with a
Mm-hmm.
dream and
Mm-hmm.
with talent. And if they were getting paid $50 a week or $100 a week, you know, just getting paid in, just free meals, and they're going on these buses around the country to play baseball because that was their dream.
Mm-hmm.
50, 60 years later, you still hear that, passion in their voice. And that's what, that's how they speak
Mm-hmm.
about their time in the Negro League. And that's how they spoke to me. And that's what really pushed me, to find more information and to find more of these guys and get them together.
Awesome. Do you do anything at all with other baseball, or are you strictly just concentrating on the Negro Leagues?
Yeah, I'm really just focused on the Negro League. We have this yearly reunion that started in 2010. After it being such a big hit, we've now had one pretty much
Right.
every year since. So every year I kind of go down to Birmingham for about a week. Um, I work on this major league Negro League pension program, something that a former player had kind of told me about when I was 12 or 13. Now Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Avell and I work on that, and if a player qualifies, they can get $10,000 a year plus
Cool.
back pay.
Cool.
So do that, yeah, and
Some
really speak with a couple former players on and off.
this really was like being a detective. You mentioned that earlier, trying to do all the research and digging and all of that. Once you got in touch with them, I want to ask you this real quick. How did you feel? Um, was reminiscing on their part? Did you go back and double check and fact check any of this stuff through newspaper accounts? I mean, what did you think? Because I know, if I talked to my uncle today about something that happened 50 years ago, I might get a whole different account from somebody else. What did you think about that? Did you feel that what they were saying was I don't want to say truthful, because everybody has their own recollections of things. But I just was wondering as to the context of something, because these are memories. A lot of the cases.
Over the years, I've communicated with hundreds of former players, and just like any pool of
Hmm.
500 random people, you're going to have people that toot their own horn more than others. And
That's yeah.
the majority of the players are humble, quiet kind of guys who, tell it exactly like it is, and if
Cool.
anything, maybe even downplay how good they were.
That
And and then there are guys who, like anything, there's a couple guys who would, exaggerate a bit, and you can just tell just how it's said. You didn't hit a home run every time you were up, and you didn't strike out every person.
hmm
And speaking with some of their teammates and people that played against them, you can kind of fill in the pieces of the puzzle and realize, hey, look,
hmm
I've seen numerous newspaper articles. You weren't in the All-Star game that year. I don't know if you did that, but I'll let them have it, and
hmm
and and yeah. So
No, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. Everybody seems to think that, so a lot of times recollections of things like, maybe this is an example, or other in people's lives, people tend to embellish and make it more than what it is. But you're right. There are a lot of people who have a hard time shining a light on themselves and downplay what they do. I'm sure there's just as many of those, if not more, people who have kept a low profile. And I think what you're doing is actually giving them more, the credit that they should deserve after all these years, as opposed to thinking that everything is an embellished um, account. It's not. And I'm really glad you did this. Again, my hat's off to you, man. This is beautiful. I'm glad that you did it. The age you did it blows me away. And keep at it, man. And I hope other people get inspired to do the same thing. Certainly younger people, because the next generation of researchers and historians we need it.
for sure.
All right, man. Thank you for your time. This was great. Anything I can do to help you, I will definitely, put some things out on Twitter and other places about the museum in Birmingham, and whatever else you need me to do, man. Just let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you again for having me.
All right, Cam. You have a great one. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.